Okay, evening everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee on Wednesday, 27th of November 2024. Before we start, can I remind everybody that this meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube tonight and the recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all councillors and officers ensure that when they speak, they switch their microphones on, and when they finish speaking, they switch their microphones off. This is extremely important for the live stream to ensure that the cameras can be focused on the person who's speaking. And even to Councillor Allen on the Zoom as well, he's a sub for Councillor Peters. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Could we have any apologies for absence, please, Dan?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Peters and Councillor Krupski.
Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any declarations of interest to declare on the item under discussion at tonight's meeting? That's no, thank you. Item number 3, we've no urgent business under Rule 12. Item 4, we've had no questions from members of the public. Item number 5, we've got no questions from members of the committee. Item 6, minutes of the previous meeting on 20th of September 2024. Any comments on the minutes? In that case, I propose the approval of the public minutes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Slater, thank you. We'll go to the votes. All those in favour? Yeah. Yeah. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Moving to item 7, the internal audit progress report. I invite Ruby and Tracy from 360 Assurance to provide an update. Any questions? Okay.
It says limitations of scope of work will be limited to terms of reference, and then you're responding to arrangements. Forgive me, emergency planning arrangements to respond to major flood incident. Brilliant. So very good. That's great. I like that. Now then, do you have are you given a list of all the emergency plans that the council's got, or how or if not, who decides what topic you're going to audit? Microphone on, by the way.
Each of the reviews that we've got within the plan, we always meet with the heads of service and the relevant senior managers within the council to discuss the potential areas for review. So as part of this, it was agreed that we would focus on the flooding. So we would be looking at those plans for this particular review.
And do we get a chance to see or to be involved in those discussions at all? Do we know what I'm getting at is, I mean, I appreciate the climate change issue is a massive thing, and you could be looking at stuff forever. But I mean, if it's on the risk register, which I hope it is, then it should be something you should be looking into, perhaps. You know, and And I know you could spend your life probably going through all the possible incidents that the council might be have to confront, but there must be some common theme perhaps that covers all of them, or like a command and control theme perhaps, or whatever, you know. And I know I'm not making this very clear. I do apologise, people, but the point is that we should have plans, as many plans as possible for all eventualities. I know that's very difficult, but I mean, any plan is better than no plan at all. Plans are bound to fail, but I mean, if we're not doing that kind of thing, and is that what you're auditing in effect? I know you see you've just got one topic here, and I'm just wondering if you're auditing in a more generic way that will cover all the possible risks. Yeah.
In relation to this particular review, it is focusing on the floods on this occasion, but obviously our plan, we cover all areas on a cyclical basis, so we would potentially look at other areas within other specific reviews. Obviously the plan's limited to a certain number of days in order to undertake the work, so obviously to look at all areas and all plans, we haven't got sufficient in this year's plan to do all of those. So there's been a specific focus into those areas.
I mean, thank you. I think you're reassuring me that there is an idea that all of it is important at some point, and both you and the officers and the leader know this. It's all important, and that there's a method for looking at this. And it would be nice, perhaps, if this committee had a bit more share of that, perhaps, Chair. I know we were promised, because we had a major incident briefing, didn't we, a little while ago. We were promised a copy of the plan when it was written again. So it would be nice if we could see that, and because I think if nothing else, we must be about surely protecting the public to the best of our ability, and if we're not doing that, then we may as well go home, might we? That's what I'm thinking. I'll stop there.
Just come in. We have got a separate review as part of the overall plan. We have got business continuity on there, but that's as a separate audit. So we would be looking at the more general high level plans within that part of it, but not necessarily in detail for all of the plans.
Thanks both. Happy to say that as an action. It's Andrea's area, isn't it, mostly planning to get a copy of the plan and send it round to you, Michael, if that's okay. And I think in terms of dealing with the one area of the floods, obviously our approach to emergency planning will be systematic. So if that looks sound, then hopefully that gives us some confidence about the other areas of focus. Yeah. Sorry, I had one question as well that I forgot to ask. It's on report number 3 around housing allocations. So it mentions there's been a lack of regular monitoring and reporting to senior management in terms of performance and oversight. And there was an annual update report in 2022. Will we be having annual update reports moving forwards?
Yeah, there's several actions. There's 3 actions for that review that's been agreed, and as part of that is to have regular reporting that will come through to the relevant audit committee.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any last questions? In that case, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Tracy and Ruby. Item number 8 is 24-25 quarter 2 reportings of write-offs, and I'll hand over to Lloyd to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. It is just a verbal update just to confirm that as at quarter 2, there were no write-offs during that quarter, so we've got nothing to report to committee this evening. Obviously, if there are any subsequent write-offs in quarter 3, we'll bring that along to the meeting that it's agendaed for.
Thank you, Lloyd. Any questions, comments to that? No? Okay, thank you. Item number 9 is the mid-year Treasury Management Report for 24-25, and I invite Dan Binks, the Chief Accountant, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The mid-year Treasury Management Report update for 24-25. This provides a mid-year update against the approved Treasury Management Strategy, and is the second report in a series of 3 required annually on Treasury Management presented to Audit Committee each year. In addition to this, monitoring reports are also provided to committee at quarter 1 and quarter 3. Section 3 and Annex 3 of the report cover an economic update and reflect the calming of the economic outlook following a period of high inflation and interest rates over previous years, with inflation moving back close to the 2% Bank of England target and a gradual reduction in interest rates. There is also a forecast of future interest rates provided by Treasury Management advisors at Annex 4. Section 4 of the report outlines the Council's Treasury Management priorities, the security of our capital, the security of our capital, followed by liquidity and then yield, commensurate with the Code of Practice and government guidelines. Investment stood at £60.6 million at the end of September 2024, with a full breakdown at Annex 2, which includes a mixture of fixed deposits, certificates of deposit and call accounts with UK banks and highly rated foreign banks, as well as UK government deposits and treasury bills and AAA rated money market funds. Section 5 demonstrates positive investment performance for the first half of the year, with an average yield of for the period of 5.3%, with investment returns continuing to perform strongly, largely due to interest rates remaining higher for longer than forecast at the budget setting process. Section 6 deals with borrowing. It highlights the capital financing requirement, which is the council's underlying needs to borrow, is forecast to increase slightly from 2023-24, which is due to an increase in statutory debt repayments known as the minimum revenue provision, which is linked to an increase in borrowing to fund the council's approved capital programme of £1.3 million planned in 24-25, and a reduction in planned voluntary debt repayments as per the medium-term financial strategy. This covers the key points in the report. The recommendation at section 15 of the covering report is for the committee to approve the report as set out in Appendix A. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dan. Any questions? Councillor Sankey?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. The CFR this year compared to the previous year, how does that compare? Was one of my questions around that, and the second one was around the debt provision in section 6. Again, I know you say it's slightly increased. Is that a standard trend that's occurring, or was it just a one-off that we expect the debt provision there to is increased? Thank you.
Yeah, so the CFR increase was around 100k between the outturn of 23-24 and the forecast for 24-25. And apologies, what was the second part of the question?
It basically a slight increase this year, just a general bit, or is it actually something that's going to be more of a trend?
I think if I...
Sorry, I don't know.
I think, so historically, and I say historically, over the last sort of 10 years, the council has funded its own element of its capital programme each year through a capital reserve. With the approved capital programme now, we've allocated all of that existing capital reserve. So new capital programmes, we either need to find external funding for them, grants, capital grants, or in the main it would be supported by external borrowing. So it's the increase that we're seeing in that debt profile at the moment is not indicative of what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years, but because of the underlying position that we are exhausting our own existing capital requirements at the moment, any new capital work that we undertake that isn't funded through grants will be funded through borrowing. So that trend in terms of debt increasing, if we further increase the capital programme, will continue.
So my understanding is internally, the borrowing has been internally managed effectively, and now we're into, because of more work, different things being done, we're now actually looking in borrowing. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Councillor Sankey. Any other questions? Okay, in that case, we'll move on. Item number 10, and we're staying with Dan for the annual government statement 23-24.
Thank you, Chair. The Sit for Solace framework delivering good governance in local government 2016 requires local authorities to publish an annual governance statement. Its key aim is to set out the governance framework and internal controls. This is to ensure that public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for, resources are used economically, efficiently and effectively, and that council business is conducted in accordance with the relevant laws and regulations. That work has been completed and the annual government statement confirms that there continues to be no significant governance issues identified in relation to 2023-24. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dan. Item 11 is the Audit Findings Report 23-24 and the Management Letter Representation. So invite Laura and Bethany from Assets to present the report.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the Audit Findings Report is to summarise exactly that, our findings from the 23-24 financial statements audit, as well as our value for money work. So we are pleased to report that the audit has now concluded and that we are proposing to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which means that we consider that following the adjustments made to the financial statements, we consider them to be a true and fair view of the financial position. We did identify 3 areas where adjustments were processed that Beth will go through in a bit more detail. And what that resulted in was a reduction to the surplus of the accounts presented for audit of just over £1 million to take the surplus to, I think it's a 2.8 million. It also resulted in a pension adjustment, which meant that the total comprehensive income and expenditure changed by around 16 million. So that is quite a large adjustment, but as I say, Beth will go through that in detail to explain that to you. There are a few outstanding bits just for us to receive and finalise before I can actually sign my audit opinion. The main one of those being we are still waiting for the assurances from the County Council's pension fund auditor. We are expecting them by the end of November, but there has been a number of delays from them, as I know you have experienced in prior years. So as soon as we get those, we will be in a position to sign the audit. When it comes to the value for money piece, we have concluded that work and we are only required to report by exception if we find any significant weaknesses in the Council's arrangements. So we haven't provided the full commentary yet, but we have concluded our work sufficiently to be able to conclude that there are no significant weaknesses that we need to report. We will, however, be making some kind of best practice and other recommendations at the next audit committee meeting. We'll bring that report. Just for completeness, we also have like a range of statutory duties that we can or do have the ability to use as external auditors, but we haven't felt the need to exercise any of those. We received draft financial statements from management and working papers in good quality and a timely manner, and the finance team have been very supportive through the process. So with a large number of new members of the finance team and new external audit, that's been really welcome from our point of view. We did increase our materiality slightly based on the draft financial statements. So the materiality that has been used is just over 1.4 million, but we report any differences over what we consider to be a trivial threshold, which has been set at just over 70,000. So if we identify any errors over that threshold, we would report them to you. The key risks that we identified in our audit plan, there's 3 significant risks we identified. The first one being management override of controls. And that means that management or key members of the finance team could be in a position to override controls that exist. However, based on our work, we haven't found any evidence of that, and we're satisfied that the controls are working effectively. The other 2 key areas are the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the pension fund liability. There are adjustments that have been processed to both of those areas. As I say, Beth will cover that, but following the adjustments, we're happy that they are materially correct. I think at this point, it's probably worth passing over to Beth, but before I do, it's worth explaining that the two of the adjustments that we identified actually relate to the prior year. So that is quite common when you have new auditors and a fresh pair of eyes looking over things, and equally new members of the finance team. So we will try and explain those as simply as possible, but please do ask questions if you have them. So Beth, I'll pass over to you.
Laura. So as Laura mentioned, I'll talk through the two prior period errors that we found which have resulted in a prior period adjustment. So focusing on page 14 of our report, we've set out there the two errors that we've identified. Firstly, I'll talk through the pension fund liability adjustment. So as part of the work that we do on the pension liability, we identified that in the prior year, no consideration was made to the potential additional liability that can arise as a result of contributions for past service costs. We discussed this with management, and it was determined that this should have been considered in the prior year as at March 23. So management were quick to action that and received the relevant report from your actuary to be able to determine what that value was impacting the prior year. And what that has resulted in is an increase to the pension liability as at the 31st of March 2023 of £16.7 million. That has also had an impact on the current year pension interest cost of £795,000. So both of those adjustments have been made, and they are set out in Appendix 1. The second prior period error, which again has been adjusted for, relates to infrastructure assets. So management did complete an existence exercise, which we do consider good practice, in the 23-24 financial year, and as a result identified 20 assets that were no longer in use by the council, and as a result processed a disposal with regards to those assets. When we came to the testing of those assets, we actually identified that they didn't meet the definition of an asset to be capitalised by the council. The council didn't hold the risk and reward of those assets. And from discussion with management, they were in agreement that actually they should never have been held on the council's balance sheet. So as a result, that has been adjusted for. That has had an impact of £848,000 both in the prior year and also the current year to write back the disposal that was accounted for in 23-24. Again, we have set out the adjustments in Appendix 1, and we have also detailed in Appendix 4 quite a comprehensive list of all the changes that have been made from the draft financial statements to the final financial statements. But we appreciate there are quite a few changes, so trying to keep it high level, but equally there is detail available in Appendix 4 if you wish to look at that. I'll just move on to page 23 of our report. So this sets out the impact of the journal adjustments for the infrastructure asset adjustment, and page 24 sets out the pension adjustment that I've just been through. The third adjustment that we identified on page 25 relates to an under accrual that we identified as part of our unrecorded liabilities testing. So we did identify one accrual that hadn't been made of £1,064,000. We did some additional work to make sure that we could be satisfied that this was the only error, and we therefore proposed an adjustment with management, and they have made that. So we are happy that no more work is needed on that area. I'll now just move on to the control recommendations that we've made as part of the audit. So these are set out in Appendix 1 on page 33. I will just cover the red and the amber, so the significant and the other control recommendations that we've made. So the first one relates to the capital accrual omission, which has been reported as an adjustment, the £1 million adjustment. So we have made a recommendation that management consider the process for how in future accruals are identified to make sure that there is no risk of future material emissions to that figure. The second adjustment that we've noted here again relates to the prior period adjustment that we identified in relation to the infrastructure assets. So again, just setting out that management are considering the capitalisation policy moving forward. So again, that doesn't happen in future. The third recommendation on page 34 is in regards to related parties. So part of the work that we completed on related parties, the information provided by management wasn't complete for the assessment that we needed to do. This was quickly rectified by management and we were soon provided with a complete listing, and this didn't result in any changes to the financial statements. But again, a recommendation we have put in our report to make sure that a process is in place to satisfy management that the working papers they provide to audit are complete. And finally, the last amber control that we've raised on page 35 relates to record keeping with regards to underlying measurements of buildings that we use as part of our work to determine the valuation of land and buildings. So it's just a record keeping point to make sure that there is a clear audit trail to support those. I think that's everything we wanted to bring to your attention, but we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you both. It's obviously a very, very thorough piece of work, and you've cleaned up a lot of different areas, which is much appreciated. Lloyd, without putting you on the spot, I wondered before we move over, would you be able to, so the 60 million sounds like a scary figure, but you've explained it to me very calmly. So I wonder if you could do the same for the committee, just to explain how that will work for the council.
Certainly. So the £16 million prior year pension adjustment that Bethany's referred to isn't a cost that we have to incur straight away. So whilst it impacts on our balance sheet, taking account of that reduction in our assets, it's not something that impacts on the council's general fund balances or our financial performance for 23-24 as a year. It's a liability that we have to account for and contribute towards over a significant period of time going forward, and we already account for our contributions to that liability with our pension contributions each year, so we've budgeted to put that right over a number of years. So whilst it is a big number and it sounds like a large adjustment, it doesn't impact the underlying financial performance of the authority. It just impacts on our balance sheet and our unusable reserves in effect.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'll hand over to questions. Councillor Sankey.
I understand the 16 million isn't sort of oops-a-daisy, we've got to hit it, we've got to pay it out this year. Over what? But what's the year-on-year impact on this? I know it's considerably smaller than that, but what it actually is the year-on-year?
So there's no year-on-year impact. So we have a triennial revaluation from the pension fund, and that sets out what our pension contributions need to be for both current pension liabilities for staff who are still working for us, and also the previous deficit that we've built up, our share of the deficit within the fund. So those pension contributions are set every 3 years via that triennial revaluation. So 23-24 was the second year of that revaluation period. So they will not change because we've misstated the accounts.
Right. So I understand the 3 year, every 3 years we review our contribution to this to see if it's still valid and accurate. But obviously a 60 million adjustment presumably means next time, in a year's time when we do the next evaluation, does that mean it's going to be affected then or not?
No, it won't. So the pension, again, quite a lot of this gets very technical very quickly, but in essence, the 22-23 position that we reported in the statement of accounts actually showed a surplus on our pension fund valuation overall.
Yeah.
part of that surplus was accrued by us contributing to past service costs. So it's our contribution to those past service costs that we can't actually obtain that money. We can't benefit from the money that was identified as a surplus on our past service costs. We aren't entitled to a refund on the contributions we've made, and it's only a valuation at a point in time, so it's not like we can access that funding. What the audit work has done is identified we should have taken account of the fact that we couldn't access that funding, and what was in the accounts should have been reduced to take account of that, but it doesn't do anything in terms of the underlying valuation of the pension fund assets within that triennial revaluation period. It's just at a point in time what we have to account for within our statement of accounts. There's no ongoing impact. The thing that will have an impact on our ongoing pension contributions is the next 3-year triennial revaluation by the pension fund, and whether their investment strategy, so where they've said they were going to invest the money that each council gives to them, has underperformed, so they've got less in terms of investment returns than they bought, or has overperformed and they've obtained more in investment returns than they'd assumed. That will have an impact on our ongoing pension contributions at the next triennial revaluation point.
Right. So my final one on the 16 million, how often does the auditors pick up that we've missed the odd 16 million?
So I think what's important to note with this 16 million adjustment is that your liability on your pension hasn't actually changed for 23-24 from the draft financial statements. What this has done is moved that 16 million almost back a year, so it should have been recognised last year. So the liability as at the 31st of March 24 is the same as it was in the draft accounts that we received. It's a timing issue that we've identified.
So given it's just a timing issue and it's not an important, what's the chance of it happening next year?
So I would say slim, because we've already been through this exercise. There has been quite a lot of change in the guidance around pension funds, particularly since they started to go into an asset position for many councils. That led to confusion, and honestly people didn't really know how to handle that, so it led to the actuaries having to do an additional piece of work called an IFRIC 14 adjustment. Given that your council was in a liability position in the prior year, that wasn't undertaken, but subsequent guidance has come out to say that should have been undertaken. So we can't caveat that things won't change in the future, but I would say it's unlikely that we would have a prior period adjustment relating to pensions going forward.
Lovely, thank you. And could I just ask, my computer just goes, the 848, I can't remember the number, the infrastructure costs, is this to do with the buildings in the asset register? What is the reason why 848k was not allocated, or whatever you'd like to wriggle on that one? So I'm sure you'll explain it very eloquent to me.
So this is, and again, I think, as Laura mentioned earlier, we have had a change in both our auditors and in a number of staff in the finance team. So this is something that's come to light with that change in staff. So all of the assets that we have now written out of the accounts are capital items that were recognised before 2010. And in the main, they were contributions from East Staffordshire Council to wider schemes that were being led by Staffs County Council. So we were contributing to schemes that were on assets owned by the County Council. So they would have recognised those assets in their accounts. We should not have recognised them in our accounts. What we should have done at the time is recognise that as capital spend, but written it straight out of our accounts. Incorrectly, we added it to our asset register as an asset, and we've been carrying that forward even though we don't own that asset.
And now, is this in the sort of property area that we've had these assets, or is it just generally across the piece?
They were general across the piece, so they were rights of way and easements in the main, where we've contributed to schemes on highways, so assets that weren't ours.
So it's nothing to do with the previous issue we had difficulty with regarding the property asset register and things. Right, and my last one, I hope, on this one, the accruals, that 1.064 million that we didn't is that a timing issue, or we just missed them?
It was an unfortunate oversight. So it was one invoice, one capital accrual, and it was actually for the cycle path on Station Street, and the scheme, part of the scheme that concluded in 23-24. So we were aware, or should have been aware, that the scheme had concluded, and we should have accrued for that. It was just one invoice that was missed, but because of the size of the scheme, it was a material value.
Okay. And there was another topic. The auditors, the best value one that you're going to report next meeting, best practice, not the what sort of cost implications have we lost out on this one? I know it's not above the threshold, but you obviously, there's a certain, sounds like a level below that you're saying, here's some best practice approaches that to deliver the goods, deliver the service better. So what sort of, I mean, are we talking of a lot of smaller amounts, or do they add up significantly, or are they in the sort of roundings, or are we talking of the odd million here popping out of the woodwork? Or am I allowed to ask that sort of question?
So I think it's probably best for me to understand the scope of our work, and then you'll know how we've approached it. Our value for money assessment doesn't look at actually how the council has spent its money. It looks at, does the council have the right arrangements in place to secure financial sustainability, secure good governance, and also secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of its resources. So the other recommendations that we'll be making don't have like a value attached to them as such. They will be recommendations around governance, financial sustainability and the 3 E's.
So it's how you do it, not how much you potentially want.
Yes, it's the arrangements in place at the council to secure value for money.
So at the next meeting, when you say these are the ways we could do it better, we could legitimately ask Lloyd to say, if we hadn't done it better, how much would it have cost? Saved us?
I think potentially you could ask that question. What we will do is raise our recommendations to Lloyd and get management's responses to those recommendations, so you've got the recommendation and the response provided to the next audit committee.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Slater.
Thank you. Could I just give you some information, ask you a question probably about the manual fixed asset register, and you're suggesting the council has a system for doing this. So basically, you're saying that they're not efficient in knowing what assets they own. Is that correct? It's page 36, internal control recommendation. I'm looking at.
No, what we have noted is that the council manually look after the fixed asset register, so it's in effect on a spreadsheet, whereas what we like to see from a best practice point of view is that it is on a system that is linked with your like ledger system and wider IT systems, so it is better at preventing error or just human error.
Thank you. That's helpful to me. I asked this question because it's recently, in fact, well, actually, it's over a year. I was told that there's a little area of land in Horning and Outwards where I live. Looking forward to planting trees on there with National Forest people. And at the last minute, they discovered it wasn't actually our land at all. It had been sold in 21, you see. And I think, forgive me, people, being a bear of simple brain, I was shown a map of areas of land that the council owned, and obviously it was wrong. The map and the open spaces bill of sales thing they use for maintaining the land didn't match. And I'm bitterly disappointed at the time. I'm still a bit sore about it now, actually, that from 21 until the middle of, in fact, October this year, we believed it was our land, and it's not our land. And we were very close to putting trees on there. I was pleased to standing on the ground, being told off for doing it illegally. And I just noticed that the management response doesn't seem, they don't seem, from what I'm reading here, that they're particularly concerned about it. And I gather it does say we will continue to review this on an annual basis, but I think really, from my point of view, I would like the maps and the ledger thing to match together, and maybe on the council website, so everybody knows what land we own. It would be good, wouldn't it, really? And then we wouldn't be in this bouncing situation I am. Having spent, sorry to bore you, everybody, I've put 500 leaflets around the area saying, yes, we're going to have a community orchard and forest just here, and we're not now. We're going to have it somewhere else. So it's not a total disaster, but it is bitterly disappointing from my point of view. So I'll just mention that to you. Stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Lloyd, I don't know if you want to come in afterwards, but I think as well this probably ties in with our recommendation that Beth mentioned about making sure there is an audit trail for like building valuation, square footage. It would apply the same to land and other assets. What I can say is we have tested the existence of land and buildings as part of our audit, and we haven't identified any concerns to a material level. So our audit can give that assurance, but if it's a one-off item, then I'd have to probably defer to Lloyd on that.
So I think there's a slight difference between what you're referring to, Councillor, and perhaps the fixed asset register. The two are probably linked together, but we've got information held by our estates team in terms of the pieces of land that we own, and buildings as well, and that should tie in with the land and buildings that we record in our fixed asset register, which, as the auditors have said, is a spreadsheet at the moment. The recommendation at the moment isn't in terms of, it would, I suppose, improve the links between those two pieces of information, but it's around holding a system-based fixed asset register for the recognition of our assets that populate the values in the accounts. So clearly there's a cost to doing that, from moving from a spreadsheet to a system-based fixed asset register. And for the small number of assets that we've got at the moment, it doesn't warrant that cost, but it is something that we will keep under review. I think that I'm saying that in the mindset that we are going through a MTFS refresh process at the moment in a series of star chambers, and noting that we've got uncertainty as we move into 2026, 27, 27, 28 on what our funding might be for those years. The government are carrying out a spending review at the moment, and we're likely to get multi-year settlements once that spending review is completed. So we should have greater certainty around our future year funding that we'll have available to us. So in light of that, once we've got that context, it should help us understand whether or not it's worthwhile then investing in a system-based fixed asset register. And we've got the funding to do that, as opposed to some of the other priorities the council might want or need to take forward.
Yes, thank you very much. That's reassuring. I mean, just so you know, so Mike Over's Open Space has promised me an updated map of the entire borough, knowing what land we own, and I don't mind what system we use as long as it's accurate and it's open to everybody. I would have thought a nice map of the bits of land we own would be the easiest way to do it myself, and then it's sort of fixed, you know, even if it's whatever system it's on. But anyway, I've mentioned that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slater. Any other questions? No. Okay. Just before we move on, sorry, thank you again for the work and the really positive outcome. It's really good to hear that management have been so responsive as well, and I know there's been a lot of strain on the financial team as well with recruitment. That's really positive. We do have the proviso that we don't have the assurances from the pension fund yet. We did, as per our letter to KPMG, invite them to the meeting tonight, and they politely declined, which we're not taking personally. But they did assure us again that they should have the assurances to us by the end of this week, so fingers crossed. But that means what we're asking you to do tonight is to, again, unfortunately, delegate responsibility for me to sign the statement in the accounts. So just checking that the committee are okay with that. Happy to put it to a vote if you'd like to. Otherwise, we fall on that basis, yeah. Okay, thank you. That concludes the formal part for this bit of the meeting. So the date of the next meeting will be 5th February 2025, same place. We've now got 4 items to consider in private, so I'll now move that in accordance with section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting as it's likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that there be disclosed exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act indicated in brackets for each item number on the agenda. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sankey? Now go to a vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. I'll wait for you to turn the tape off.